All right, well, apologies for the delay. We will be able to go a little longer on this session, I've been told, than we had thought so you won't miss anything, and I'm hoping we'll get as much done as we can. Welcome back to Africa in Davos. I really am in an extraordinary position where I can honestly say I don't need to introduce any of my panel guests. In fact, I'm probably the only person that most people in the room don't recognise. So I'm Becky Anderson from CNN, and my guests are, of course, on both sides of me, Gordon Brown, Niall FitzGerald, President Obasanjo, Paul Wolfowitz, and Bono. These panellists, to a man, have played a pivotal and continue to play a pivotal role in Africa's future and the future for African people. 2005 was a year when expansive promises were made. We are hoping that we will talk about how good those promises were and whether people are coming good on them. Before we start with what we're going to do today, let's just reflect on what happened last year. Roll the tape. Something did happen. Yes.
It's time that people in the Western world give the microphone to the African people to talk about their own problems.
It's all very well putting our hand in our pockets and being charitable, but actually what Africa wants is trade, not aid.
All we are asking is that the world should open up its doors to African products.
It's better to teach a man how to fish than to give him the fish.
We must look at the balance between debt relief, support for the development of trade and infrastructure, and finance for development, including health and education.
We cannot confront the endemic perpetual crisis of African poverty on any basis other than a partnership between African governments and those of the developed world.
Personal philanthropy can be a major factor here because it funds new ideas and approaches that typically government wouldn't fund. It's got to be a combination. The scale of the problem requires government funds and individual funds.
And all I see is you, and even if my house falls down, I wouldn't have a clue.
I was very reluctant to do this again. I couldn't see how anything could possibly be better than that glorious day 20 years ago.
Do you think people actually know why they're there? Has the message got across?
I bring some specific projects to the table, broader initiatives of trade, HIV/AIDS initiative.
I believe the world owes Africa some focus, some attention. I think there's a lot of opportunities in Africa.
I think there's an opportunity for a real breakthrough here in the next year.
As long as poverty, injustice, and gross inequality persist in our world, none of us can truly rest.
Well, 2005 was expected to be, or certainly was hoped, that it would be a turnaround year. So we will start. Rules are this, guys. 2.5 minutes, I hope no more than that, as we talk. We'll get to the audience in about half an hour's time. As many questions as you can give us, and then we'll get back for a sort of final thought from our guests at just before 12 o'clock. Bono, people made an awful lot of promises last year. Are they delivering on those promises that they made to you?
Just like to say, I think I'm much better looking in real life. And certainly taller. And could it be 2.5 minutes for the people who aren't Irish?
No.
Very, very hard to answer that question, because it could be 2, it could be 8 out of 10, depending on what happens this year. Not just with the politicians and the people on the ground in Africa, but actually all of the people here in media, etc. Whether this goes cold or whether it stays hot as an issue. I think this is really, really important. We have to make sure that the aid is spent well, too. There's an issue of credibility. The corruption, not just corruption in Africa, but corruption in the way we treat Africa and deal with Africa. Qualifications are important for those aid, but we need bottom-up qualifications. We need mutual accountability, not just pushing the developing nations, but the developed nations, and making sure they keep their promises, because, and I think Gordon will agree with this, though I do not include him in this so far, but politicians love to sign checks, but they don't like as much cashing them. And really and truly, all of last year's works will come down to whether the politicians cash the checks or not. We had a breakthrough here in Davos yesterday, or was it the day before? It gets a little funny, as you know, Davos time. But Angela Merkel, the Chancellor, new Chancellor of Germany, stood by her commitment, or stood by Germany's commitment made at the G8 summit for 0.7% of national income, of GDP, despite calls in her own government that she shouldn't do so. This was a really serious achievement, and so makes it look more likely that we get to 8 than 2.
Gordon Brown, same question. On a scale of 1 to 10, how well do you think the world did in 2005?
One was debt relief, and I think we have moved that forward. And I think most people would recognise that about $170 billion of debt over these last few years is going to be written off. I think on trade, we haven't done well at all. I think this is the challenge of the next few weeks, actually, rather than months, that we must restart the trade negotiations. India and Brazil are making offers. Europe and America must come together. I think it's incumbent upon all of us, and I know Niall here will endorse this, to move the trade talks forward, and I hope there's a new energy coming out of Davos for that. On aid, I think, as Bono said, promises have been made, and the question is whether they will be delivered. Martin Luther King used to say of the American Constitution, it was a promissory note, but the check that had been offered had been returned marked insufficient funds. And I do believe that is the challenge for us. We must make sure that promises and commitments lead to delivery and results, and that is the challenge of 2006 and 2007. But I do think on another scale the argument is changing. We used to talk, I think for centuries, about what we could do for Africa. The real question is about empowerment, what Africa empowered is able to do for itself. And I would suggest that the major follow-through from what was decided and agreed between Africa and the G7, but Africa and all advanced industrial nations last year, is that on health and education, each country is asked to submit long-term plans that would require secure and sustainable funding over a period not of a year or two, but over at least 10 years, so that on universal education we can achieve our goal, and on universal healthcare we can achieve our goal. So the next stage for me is to move from aid to empowerment, and the means by which that empowerment, I think, can be best advanced is that we say we will honour our promises, and it's thanks to a lot of you here that these promises have been made, and I thank you. And African countries now submit, and I hope President Obasanjo would think that this is the right way forward, plans for universal schooling free of charge for every child, so that the 110 million children who are not going to school around the world can go to school, and plans for universal healthcare, particularly so that we can build the capacity in healthcare systems, and the partnership is a partnership for empowerment. And I believe that is in the spirit of 2005, that we take it forward in this way for the years to come. So it's delivery and results, and I think the theme should now be empowerment.
Paul Wolfowitz, Bono just alluded to the fact that he hoped that there was enough cash in the banks of nations who had promised money to honour their checks, effectively. How much money is the World Bank prepared to put into Africa in order to help it out? What are you doing? Give me some concrete examples, financial concrete examples of what is being done as a result of promises that were made last year and indeed in the years before, on what happens next.
Well, for example, we've put money into malaria booster campaign that'll put $500 million into trying to deal with this scourge, which kills a child in Africa every 30 seconds. 1 million people die from malaria, 90% of them in Africa. The health problems are enormous, but if you ask sort of where are we, I think if I put it on a scale of 1 to 10, I'd say it's about a 7. But I put a few qualifications. Africa really needs to be a 14 or a 15. The poverty in Africa that's increased over the last 20 years, just to cut it in half in 10 years is going to require 7% growth. And the interesting thing, though, to me, and I think not well enough known, people know about the difficult conditions. People know that there's poverty in Africa. Let me remind you that while we sit here and enjoy pretty comfortable lives, 300 million people in the subcontinent are trying to get by on $1 for this day. That's the grim news that people know. What I think is less well known is that Africa has been moving. And there's a very surprising poll that Gallup did, the result of which is that when you ask people, do they think 2006 will be better than 2005, the best result is in Africa. 57% of Africans expect next year to be better than this year. I think it's partly because of the success of things like Gleneagles. It's partly because of the debt relief commitment and the increased commitments to aid. But I think it's most of all, it's because of what Africans are doing. It's because in the last 5 or 6 years, 15 African countries, the high performers admittedly, there are a lot of others, but 15 African countries have been turning in median growth rates of 5%, and it begins to affect people's expectations. That's the good news. But I think the bad news is high expectations can also lead to high disappointment. It is absolutely critical now, I think, that everybody deliver, that the World Bank delivers, that the donor governments deliver, that the recipient governments deliver. Bono referred to the issue of corruption and accountability. One of the reasons I'm much more optimistic about Africa than people who dealt with it 20 years ago is I see governments stepping up to say we are responsible to our people for the money that we get and for results.
Which ones? Sorry, let me just stop you there. Which ones? Because I want you to give us a real sense of where you think Africa's going right and where you think Africa's going wrong. So far as accountability and the corruption issues are concerned. Accountability-wise and transparency, who's getting it right and who's getting it wrong? Let's get down and dirty here.
Well, Nigeria is one example of getting it right. Some very courageous decisions made by President Obasanjo and his ministers, not only to do the important work of putting corrupt people in jail, but in a way even more important to build up the institutions of transparency and accountability that make it very hard to steal in the first place. And by the way, with some significant support from outside, we can't talk about this issue for too long without making the point that corruption is not unique to the developing world. Anywhere that people have a chance to make money dishonestly, there will be somebody who will step up to try to do it. Fortunately, in the case of Nigeria, Switzerland has found $489 million of stolen Nigerian money that they have now returned to the government of Nigeria. And Minister Ngozi and President Obasanjo have set up mechanisms to make sure that money gets to the people. I visited South Africa just 2 days after the deputy president was dismissed, not because he had taken a bribe, but because one of his key assistants had taken a bribe and the president felt political accountability was necessary. On the other hand, 9 of the 10 countries at the bottom of the Transparency International list are in Africa. You can go read their names. So it's a mixed picture.
Yeah, because there are as many countries in Africa as there are states in the United States, of course. And you know, it will worry people and continues to worry people that you will name South Africa and Nigeria at the top of the list and perhaps not come back with any more. And I will come back to you because I'm sure there are many, many more names, but I want to get to President Obasanjo here. You did 6 years ago make it a priority that you would try and stamp out corruption. And what you talked about then was a priority to look at business. It was a classic situation that Western business would effectively come in and provide bribes for those in your country who wanted to do business with them. There is some accountability. There has been some effort on transparency. I'm not going to suggest that everything's right yet, though, is it? And I want you to give us a sense of where you think things are at this point. It would be ridiculous to say that the country wasn't any longer corrupt. Give us a sense, though, of where you think you are at this point.
I, first of all, want to express my satisfaction. I never ever thought that for any discussion on Africa here in Davos, we will have a full room like this. For me, it means that gradually Africa is becoming less of a basket case. It's now becoming more of a full room case. I thank you for that. Since you specifically asked about corruption in Nigeria, let me try to deal with that. But before I deal with that, we saw a video now which talks about the situation in Africa. And Gordon and Bono had talked a little bit about the situation. I believe that for us in Africa, we can, on balance, regard the year 2005 as a successful year, on balance. Of course, not all our problems have disappeared, far from it. But when you look at it and say that in Africa, in the year 2005, elections took place in Liberia successfully, change of government through election in Tanzania, successfully in Burundi, successfully in Guinea-Bissau, successfully. Wow. 20 years ago, that was unthinkable. Now, it's a small thing. It's things that you have taken for granted in the Western world. But these are things that we are trying to get into our system and into our way of life so that sooner than later, we can also take it for granted. Now, that is one. Gordon made the point about debt relief. There was promise on debt relief. 18 hippie countries got debt relief. 14 of them, is it?
14. Plus 8, plus 9, yeah.
Yeah.
You're right.
14 of them from Africa. And even Nigeria got debt relief. Well, I've heard people saying that the debt relief that Nigeria got, we should never have paid anything back. I am not in that league. What I am saying is that we got a deal. It's a fair deal. If, as a result of how well we are doing, Gordon will recommend that DFID should give us more money, of course, I will never refuse it. I will never reject it. But the deal that we had on debt relief is a satisfactory deal for us. Now let me go to the corruption. You are absolutely right. I wanted to deal with the two, really, the corruption of Nigerian officials and the corruption of those who are doing business with us. Because corruption requires two, the taker and the receiver. And what used to happen is that the emphasis used to be placed on the receiver rather than the giver. And, well, I made a law, and I must say that what has happened is that we have got back a lot of the money that, with the connivance and the help of giver, has gone out. This country has been helpful, reluctantly, but eventually we got the help. Other countries have also been helpful.
Okay.
And then Nigerians.
Okay, go on.
Nigerians, there we have actually achieved greater success.
Okay.
Ministers have been sacked. The chief police officer in our country has been sacked, and I think he's partially in jail. 2 state Governors have been removed, including one who jumped bail in London.
All right. You're making your point, and it's a very, very good one. I do want to come back to it, and there have been some successes. I do want to come back also to the point, though, that $483 million of money has been removed from Swiss bank accounts that was stolen from Nigeria. I wonder how much more is in those Swiss bank accounts, and I think it's an interesting question, and we might get back to it a little later. I do, though, want to get to Niall FitzGerald. You have talked about how important it is, Niall, that big business plays a good, big, and increasingly important role in Africa going forward. I know that Africa gets something like less than 5% of private sector investment, which is a ridiculously low number at this point. Why is that, and how do you improve it?
Well, I'll answer that in a moment. Let me just come to the general issue first, very quickly, if I might, because you asked us to scale 2005. I'm a natural-born optimist. I wouldn't be involved in Africa if I wasn't an optimist. You have to be. But yet, being a natural-born optimist, my scale is somewhere, it's 3-4. And why is it 3-4? I think it's because 2005 was the year of Africa, and there's a real danger now that people generally are fatigued with it. 2005 was the year, so let's move on and do something else, without really understanding that it was a year of alluring commitments, but a year of very little actual action. Not blaming anybody. There wasn't going to be that much action, but we've got to be very clear with regard to what the follow-up is. And there are parties involved. It starts, of course, with government. We've heard about debt relief, which Gordon has done a fantastic job, in my view, on what was required there. But it's the follow-through which will really determine whether this succeeds or not. We have trade, and let's be very clear in our speaking here. Hong Kong, there's been an enormous amount of energy spent on trying to convey that Hong Kong was not a failure. Hong Kong was a failure. It took it forward, in the words of Pascal Lamy himself, we're moved from 55 to 60%. Well, we have to get to 100%, and we have to get there quickly. And the fact is, Bono made the point, and has made it repeatedly, that Africa, in the end, in the words of the Africa Commission, Africa is poor ultimately because Africa hasn't grown. And it would only grow when it is allowed to trade fairly and freely and openly. And one of the commitments that the G8 bought into in Gleneagles, on the recommendation of the Commission for Africa, was that all trade-distorting subsidies should be eliminated by 2010. Now, we're nowhere near that. We're nowhere near that, and we're not going to get anywhere near that in 2006. Then when it comes to business, business has both an opportunity and a responsibility. And my disappointment currently is that the businesses who already operate in Africa, who are successful on purely commercial grounds, are very slow to stand up and explain to people why they're successful. There seems to be a shyness, almost a sense that if I say I'm successful in Africa, somehow or other I'll be seen to be exploiting all these poor Africans. That's not the case. You're bringing jobs, you're bringing trade, you're bringing expansion of the economy. And we who have operated in Africa for many years, all of us, have a responsibility to stand up and say so, and say why it works, to encourage others to do so. And to play off what Paul has described as if you look across Africa now, in 2005 it will have grown by 5.5%. That's double the rate of the European Union. So there is an opportunity for business in Africa. And actually, if I put it back in its context of European and American business, that opportunity is being now seen more clearly, and they are moving much more quickly from China and India. There are now 700 Chinese businesses operating across Africa. There has been significant Chinese investment. And an opportunity will be lost, if we're not careful, to others, because somehow or other we're locked into an old view of what Africa was and what the opportunities are. If you then come back to the commitments made, the aid commitments, they're very good. The only figure, however, I've seen against the 25 billion is 166 million, which I think the European Union agreed as to 10 poor countries. Well, that's a step. It's a tiny step, and it's a tiny step against 25 plus another 25 in 2010. But more importantly, we have to get on with the work of making sure that that aid is channeled into the areas of health and education and infrastructure, which will allow Africa to trade better. Ultimately, it has to trade. African economies have to grow, and that's how you will get prosperity across. Take sub-Saharan Africa. Lots of numbers are thrown around. Let me leave you with one other, since we're sitting here in a relatively small, by size at least, European country. The GDP of sub-Saharan Africa, for the 700 million people in sub-Saharan Africa, is 80% in total of the GDP of the 17 million people of the Netherlands. That cannot be allowed to continue.
I want to continue the idea of trade here, and I want a message from each and every one of you on the stage here to those who are here. There have been or are 20 trade ministers here, and both the EU and US trade representatives are or have been here at least. There were hopes that Doha talks might have been moved on here, and that is an important issue to Africa as well. The region's share of global trade has fallen from 6% in the early 1980s to only 2% today. And if we're talking about numbers and we're talking about aid, for example, listen to this one on trade. Increasing this by 1% would provide sub-Saharan Africa with an additional $70 billion in export receipts. That is far more than was promised, even at Gleneagles last year, on the issue of aid. So those are big numbers. I want to go to you, Bono, first on the issue of trade. Your message to Peter Mandelson, to Pascal Lamy at the WTO, and indeed to Rob Portman, US Trade Representative, if you will.
Drink heavily. Would be my first advice.
What, African beer, you mean?
Irish whiskey, of course. Irish infant industry, including whiskey. Given preferential treatment in its own day. And these are things denied, of course, the poorest countries in the world. And they have been, in the past, forced to open up their markets to the forces and the gale winds of the free market, which was supposed to save everything, while at the same time, this was not true in Europe, of course, or in the United States, which is, I would say, an issue of our corruption. If you can't get a loan without opening up your markets, I think that's our corruption. Even the United States protected its infant industry. Alexander Hamilton was the first Treasury Secretary there, and though he was no friend of debt relief, he was the geezer who decided America should pay its debts back to Great Britain on independence. I think he coined the phrase infant industry, and the United States came out of a rural agrarian economy and went into its industrial phase through protecting small business. What African countries need, and President Obasanjo will talk about this with real authority, is preferential treatment as they negotiate their way through trade. We see this successfully handled in South Asia and the like. So, yeah, the trade is absolutely key. I saw in the earlier film, it said, I think it's Confucius, the guy was quoting, it's better to give teach a man how to fish than give him a fish. I'd like to add something to that. It's better to teach a man to fish, but it's even better to teach a man how to sell fish. And I think African entrepreneurial, Africa, very entrepreneurial people, and they want to grow their businesses, and let's get out of their way. That's what I'd say.
Thank you, Bono. Gordon Brown, on the issue of trade, if you will, message to those who are negotiating and trying to keep these stalled, in inverted commas, Doha talks alive.
Let me first of all acknowledge what Bono and so many others did last year. They put not only aid and debt relief, but trade directly on the agenda. I think I've said before, Bono, you're my mentor and my tormentor. But this was an astonishing campaign, and I think what Niall was expressing was the worry that the energy of 2005 is somehow to be dissipated in 2006 and 2007. I believe we must move forward with new objectives for 2006 and 2007, and one of these must be the conclusion of the trade talks. Now, how is that going to happen? We had a meeting of the G7 finance ministers just before Hong Kong. India came with a new proposal. Brazil came with a new proposal. There is a willingness, in my view, to compromise. These are very complex negotiations. I wouldn't want to criticise anybody as individuals who are part of these negotiations. Is that a message from Peter?
He's on his way.
He's on his way. I'll take a call in a minute.
Shall I turn it off? Yes.
I think you'd better. But I think what needs to happen, and it may be heads of government will have to do this, there was some discussion before Hong Kong that heads of government should get together to push these trade talks forward. It's going to need the statesmanship of a number of different continents to get a conclusion to these negotiations. The Indian position, the Brazil position, which represents that of a number of countries, has got to move, but the American and European position has got to move. I believe we would be strongest in getting a negotiated settlement if America and Europe came together, decided to make further proposals on agriculture itself, and on that basis, a meeting of heads of government was held in the form of a G8 plus all the different countries that are involved intimately in putting proposals on these negotiations. President Lula has actually proposed this, and this is one way that we can move things forward. And I don't believe we can wait till the G8 in Moscow. I don't believe we can wait months before this happens. If we cannot be seen to act as a world community on these issues, people will conclude that we do not have the will to reach a settlement. So my proposal would be that we look at whether a meeting of world leaders is possible over the next period of time to resume the talks with the remit clearly to get a settlement. Now, the advantages, without going into them in great detail, are clear, and they're clearest, as Bono said, for the countries that he has been talking about in Africa. But let us also remember, and that's why I want you to think of the issue of empowerment, that it is not just opening the door to trade that matters, it's that people can walk through that door, and they must have the capacity to trade. And that means transport, it means infrastructure, it means water, it means education, and we will have to put funds behind the building of capacity for countries that are seeking to trade, and that must be part of that final settlement.
Gordon, doesn't it also mean, Chancellor, that we have to look at the common agricultural policy?
Absolutely.
And doesn't it mean that we have to look at this sacred cow of ours? I use the word cow carefully because it turns out European cows are paid about $2 a day, which is more than a third of the population of the earth, which is one of the most incredible obscenities. The cows are it would be hard if you said to a fisherman in Mali, swap jobs. Would you rather be a cow? And I think he would be very upset. And it makes it impossible for African farmers to compete. And so we
But not a cow in Africa.
There's the door.
Let me just finish that point off. When I say America and Europe must come together, it is about making new proposals on agriculture. That must happen. The problem of the European Union in the last 50 years is we attempted to build peace, rightly so, by creating prosperity with huge subsidies for agriculture. As I said before, we tried to turn swords into plowshares, but in the end created far too many plowshares. And we must now reform this common agricultural policy. We put forward a proposal for a 10-year plan to reform the CAP.
Right.
I believe that these things must be on the agenda. There can be no justification for the present level of subsidy.
The scandal here is, and it's not just Europe, United States, Europe and Japan between them, consumers and taxpayers spent $260 billion a year. Let me repeat, $260 billion. We're talking about doubling aid to Africa from $25 billion to $50 billion. We spend $260 billion subsidizing our agriculture.
Okay, let's move on. I want us to move on. I will come back to you. I'm wondering whether this is an appropriate moment to ask you if there was that heads of state meeting, world leader meeting, would you be representing the UK on that, and when would that be? It's not appropriate to ask that now. Brief. You can be brief. Yes or no? Yes or no?
I think it should be in the next few weeks.
Excellent. Take that down. I want to, move on, and I'll come back to you on the issue of trade, President Obasanjo. I want to get to you, Paul Wolfowitz, and then to you, Niall FitzGerald, as well. I put this to you, and I'm not suggesting there's any conspiracy theory, but when you became head of the World Bank, Mr. Wolfowitz, I thought that was an interesting point. You had been the architect of the strategy, some would say, in Iraq, and that involved the issue of oil as much as anything else, the empowering of those countries and the export of democracy as far as the American administration was concerned. And then you became head of the World Bank and made Africa your priority. I'm wondering how important African assets are becoming to the US going forward, and how big a part you will be playing in providing access to 20 or 30% of the US's oil assets from Africa in the future. Is this a conspiracy theory or not? Probably.
It is.
Right, okay. But let's talk about oil and its potential for leading Africa out of this darkness or back into it, as it were.
Look, the fact is, if you look around the world, oil has more often been a curse than a blessing. I visited Burkina Faso, which is an African country with no ivory, no gold, no oil, but national unity, no civil war, remarkable harmony among 64 ethnic groups. That's an unmitigated blessing. The challenge is going to be, and President Obasanjo is trying to change the situation in Nigeria. We're trying to get back on this agreement with Chad, which will assure, if we can get back to it, that money goes to the poorest people. It's not only, it's two things. It's both a matter of getting the money where it needs to go, but I've also been struck at how many, and there are quite a few successful African business people, have come to me in the context of this Chad debate and said, it's very important, if we're going to create an African private sector, that governments understand the money doesn't belong to them, it belongs to the people. No, I think it's a huge challenge, but this is, I mean, forget your conspiracy theories. The interest, I think, of the developed world is in not having 600 million people left behind. It's an unhealthy world when that is happening. The skepticism about globalization, which extends way beyond people who may have lost a job. The young people that Bono and others have mobilized in this campaign are going to be very disillusioned if 5 or 10 years from now Africa slipped backwards instead of moving forward.
Okay. And Niall FitzGerald, just how important is Africa to the US so far as its oil assets are concerned going forward? And let's also, if we can, get from you your thoughts on Chinese business in Africa and how Africa might deal with its relationship with China going forward.
Well, if I may, Becky, I just want to make one thing on the Common Agricultural Policy, because I think it's important that business is heard on this. At least one business person is heard on it, because not enough are heard on it. And again, let's make it very clear, the Common Agricultural Policy is the most illiterate economic regime that has ever been invented. It pushes prices up, it distorts supply, and it denies access to the world. The benefits of it don't go in some sort of misty-eyed way to poor people in rural communities. It goes to large landowners and to large agricultural industries. And the sooner we face up to that, and the sooner that we call it what it is, the better. Also, if I might, to my friend Bono, don't be a cow in the European Union, be a cow in Japan. They get $7 a day.
There's some Kobe beef coming on.
Now, on your direct question, oil is going to be hugely important. And we have a vested interest in creating policy and as business being engaged in ensuring that the region in which a very large portion of the new oil which comes forward, that region is secure and is stable. And it becomes secure and stable if you invest. It becomes secure and stable if you stimulate growth. It becomes secure and stable if you allow it to grow and to trade its way to growth. And that's in our vested interest, even if we want to be selfish about it. On China, I mean, I am very admiring of the Chinese and the Indians, it must be said, who are, it would appear, now prepared to take much more risk in investment in Africa, although I don't think it is risk, but judged by what others are doing or not doing. Yes, there are questions about the way in which they approach it, because some people would argue their standards would be different from Western business. I think that's I wouldn't like to get into that discussion in the sense that I'm not sure what standards they're applying yet. What I do know is they're going to carve out a very, very large chunk of really promising business opportunities in Africa. And in 5 to 10 years' time, Western businesses will be saying, how did we miss that opportunity? Were we not brave enough? Were we not committed enough? Were we too risk averse? And I think the answer is yes to all three.
I think I should open this to the floor. I apologise. We've been going on for some time. Are there any questions from the floor at this point? Right, okay. Thank you, sir. We'll take questions for about 10 minutes, in fact, because, yeah. Can you just stick up your hands how many people have questions out there? Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 or 7. Okay, all right, we'll as quickly as you can, please, thanks.
My name is Sigmund Sternberg. I've been a Rotarian for many years. Rotary has done a great deal in Africa. They've eradicated polio. There are a number of Rotarians here who know what Rotary has done, and I urge you to find out what Rotary is doing. Rotary is represented in 172 countries. There are 1.25 million Rotarians all over the world. Please try to join Rotary. Rotary International will be very pleased to have you.
Okay, thank you for the advert. That's very, very good. Well marketed.
Is it a religion?
Let's move on. But make a very good point. Where's
Is it a religion?
Yes. You're all in the marketing business these days, aren't you? Next one, please. Yes, sir, over there.
Better be in the religion business. There's no tax. Rotarianism.
There will be in the future.
Stephen Walt, Kennedy School of Government at Harvard. Nothing has been said here about the genocide in Darfur. We've been focusing primarily on economic development. The world said never again after World War II. We said never again after Rwanda. Are we saying it's okay? One more time. I'd like just comments from the panel.
Right, who would like to take that first, please? Because we need to talk about conflict-ridden regions, and President Obasanjo, please pick up on this. I know that you lead the African Union, and you're hugely involved in trying to sort out the problems of your very own continent. Your thoughts?
Well, let's get it right. The UN set a team to look at the situation in Darfur. It's an unfortunate situation, and of course, all of us were concerned about it. But the UN commission or panel did not call it a genocide. And therefore, we in the AU have not called it a genocide. We believe that there are probably things that the government of Sudan should have done that may have been done late or inadequately, but we did not call it and we did not see it as genocide. Now that is the first thing. The second thing is that because we are concerned about what is happening in Darfur and indeed between Sudan and Chad, the meeting we have just that I just ended of AU summit 4 days ago, Sudan wanted to be chairman, and we said, no, that's not good enough. You have to put your human rights house in order. And I think this is a new thing, the type of new thing that is coming out of Africa. Maybe 20 years ago, that would not have been said, and it would not have been done. I believe that we should appreciate some of these things and more. We have something we call African peer review mechanism. Among ourselves, we take a country, we say, what are you doing? We x-ray it completely. And we have just done Ghana, where we even look at the constitution of Ghana, and we said, there's not enough separation of power between the executive and the legislature, because the Ghanaian constitution allows members of the legislature to be ministers. And they have more than a third of members of the legislature as ministers. And people said that, look, where then is the separation of power? Because you have all of them as ministers. I just want to say this. There are a number of things that are happening in Africa that we must appreciate. I don't say we are there yet. We are far from being there.
Can I just do a follow on this? I do wonder whether people in this room are wondering why Africa has to wait for the UN to call something genocide before it itself decides that it's genocide and you do something about it. I'm just wondering.
We, right from the word go, said it's not genocide. The American government and American executive called it genocide. And the UN had to prove whether it's genocide, as the Americans say, or it's not genocide, as the Africans said. And the UN Commission came on the side of Africa.
All right, that was just sweeping up that point.
Whatever the word is, they're terrible crimes against humanity that have gone on and are going on. And I think, I mean, this isn't World Bank business. Well, it is in a way, and I want to explain that. But I think more needs to be done. I think it's very commendable, as President Obasanjo said, that it's unprecedented to have refused Sudan the chairmanship of the AU. But there needs to be more pressure. I think it's fair to say that one of the constraining factors is there was a successful agreement to resolve this other horrible conflict, the North-South one, and people are concerned about disrupting that. But let me say, the reason it has some World Bank connection is you go to Rwanda, you go to Bosnia, you visit these post-genocide societies, and you realize that it's a much deeper scar and much harder to heal than simply post-conflict.
But I think President Obasanjo is right. We must do what we can to strengthen the African Union, and this focus on human rights, this focus on democracy, and this focus on transparency is a huge step forward, and we must do everything we can to back up that.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I want to ask Paul, Rick Warren, Purpose-Driven Life, what are the... Rick Warren, Purpose-Driven Life. Paul, what are the World Bank priorities in funding in Africa? How would you list them?
I'd say education, health, infrastructure, and agriculture. And let me say a word about the last two. I mean, I was a little surprised when I came in as head of the World Bank to find practically every African leader I spoke to say, why did the World Bank get out of infrastructure? I was a little surprised to learn that we had gotten out as much as we had. I think a lot of you probably know the reason, which is there were a lot of white elephant projects, big infrastructure projects are susceptible to corruption, unfortunately, and there was a somewhat naive belief that the private sector could do all of this and do it better. I think we've gotten back in, we're getting back in more heavily, we're trying to do it in a way that doesn't repeat the mistakes of the past, that learns about how to do infrastructure in an environmentally sensible way. But for example, we were talking about trade. With the best Hong Kong deal in the world, Rwandan farmers are still going to spend 80% of the 80% of the income from Rwandan coffee is spent transporting it from Rwanda out. Those costs have got to be reduced. Agriculture, I was a little shocked to learn. The World Bank has cut its staff over the last 15 years, its agriculture staff by 50%, USAID by 2/3, and then you wonder why there's not a green revolution in Africa. Agriculture was a major step on Asia's development. I think it can and should be a major step on Africa's development. But then there's one other thing which isn't about money, and it is one of the most interesting things I've seen when I came into the bank. I think one of our best products is something called the Doing Business Report, which identifies, not for foreign investors, I'll explain that in a second, but for African leaders, the obstacles to starting small businesses. For example, in the small country of Burkina Faso, if I remember correctly, it costs 1.5 times per capita income to pay the license fees to start a business. Now, the per capita income is around $300 or $400, so that's only $500. Probably for most of the people here, that's only an expensive lunch. But for a poor person in Burkina who's trying to start a business, it's an impossible barrier, and the result is in that country only 50,000 people work in the formal sector. These are things that need to be changed, and it's not something that any foreign institution can impose, but what has impressed me about leaders like President Obasanjo is when the facts are there, when you do a peer review of Ghana, for example, people say, wow, I didn't realize we had those stupid policies, we'll do something to fix them. That's what accountable government is about.
Yes, please.
Can I just say to Paul and through the questioner, if the World Bank could move its fast-track initiative on education forward, it would make a huge difference over the next few years.
Yes.
A commitment has been made in terms of aid. Yes. There's 110 million children who are not going to school. countries could be asked to submit their own plans, not for a year or two, but over 10 years, so that there is universal primary education. The average cost of primary education for a school child in Africa is less than $100 per year. It is so cheap and so cost-effective if it could be done. And I believe there is a will amongst all the major countries to finance that initiative. But at the moment, you've got 60 countries wanting to be part of it. You're only funding 25. We must make this a massive campaign around the world. Universal, free, primary education for every child. When Kenya made universal education free for every child, 1 million children turned up to be enrolled at school in just a day. When Uganda did it, they moved the numbers of kids in education from 2 million to 6 million. This is possible. It can be done. We need to build the capacity to do it. The World Bank could play an enormous part in this, and we should ask each African country to submit the plan for the next 10 years, and I believe you could get worldwide support for universal free education for every child.
We leave that in your capable hands, sir. Next question. Go, shake on it. It's done. Excellent. Achieved at Davos. Sir, Paul Coelho, I see you in the audience there. Hello, sir.
Gabriel, noisemaker. With reference to the Nigerian money found in Switzerland, is there nothing we can do about European and American banks that knowingly accept the fruits of corruption? And is a private bank account for someone who holds office a luxury the world can no longer afford?
We've changed the laws.
Sorry, go on, please. And I apologise, sir. You look just like somebody else, and it's Peter Gabriel, of course. Sorry. No, you both. Bono. Oh, no, President Obasanjo. Who wants to start, President?
No, I haven't a clue as to the technical side of that. I just think it's a very good idea. I thought it was already happening, but if it isn't, it really should very quick. And everyone should look under their seat here, because there's probably a few brown paper bags, even in this very room. That's a joke.
President Obasanjo?
Gordon, you want to say something? Yeah, look, things have changed. When we came into government, it's unbelievable to think of this, but you could claim tax relief in Britain for bribing a company or a country. And so you could actually claim tax relief on your tax form for doing so, and we had to outlaw that. And we did. But I think partly because of terrorism, the new requirements that are being placed on banks and financial institutions, that they have responsibilities themselves where they believe there are suspicious transactions for reporting it. And they are liable if they have not taken the action that is necessary, is an important part of this armoury. Now, governments must do more. Recipients and, of course, people who are in contracts from the richest part of the world must take more action. The financial institutions themselves have a responsibility, and I think in each country of the world, these laws are now being tightened up, and they should be.
Well, I was one other thing I wanted to say by way of introduction to you, Mr. President, who is, and I think I say this again, we are very humbled to be in your company discussing what is your continent, and you're a noble figure on that continent, a great hero to Africa. Not just that, but President Obasanjo has a finance minister with that most musical of names. If I can get it, Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala. It's very well. This is a heroine of very high order, who has tried to change the image of her continent and indeed her country, and who recently, and I think people should know this because it's a success story, with a windfall from increases in oil prices, decided to spend that figure, which I think was about $12 billion, buying back debt service from the Paris Club and indeed from the UK. And whilst I wish we weren't taking the money, I think it is an amazing achievement, and I can't think of that happening 10 years ago. And I want to salute her and her president for their sort of rectitude and moral leadership.
Bono, thank you very much. Our experience with chasing Nigerian stolen money abroad is very instructive. I will say we have achieved tremendous success, but it has not been too easy, even with Britain, with all due respect, Gordon. Because once this money gets in, it tends to be locked in. And then we are told to prove that it's our money. Now here you have a man, you know him, he has no farm, he has no industry, and he puts in your bank from Nigeria, puts $20 million in your bank. And you didn't ask him, where did he get the money from? And we trace the money and we say, hey, this is Nigerian money. And you say, come and prove. And we say, okay, look, here is the proof. This is how you make the money, either of over-invoicing, and we show you. And then we are told, okay, come and show us how you will spend the money. We say, all right, this is how we will spend the money. And Ngozi, stand up where you are. Bono has been talking well about you when you are not here.
Yes, there you are.
And then we are told, well, tell us how you will spend the money. And then I send Ngozi, now this is how we will spend it. And then he comes back blank. And he said, well, they say, well, they want World Bank to supervise. I said, oh, no, my friend Paul, tell him he's welcome to come and supervise, take it. Then he goes, and then World Bank, and then they still say, well, we are not ready yet because the money has been invested. You have to wait for 9 months to get, now what nonsense is this? Now, and this is the type of thing we get. And yet there's a convention, UN convention against corruption, which all these countries are supposed to be signatory to. And if any country has not been signatory to it, has not signed it, maybe we should be considering expelling them from the UN. Thank you.
There you go. All right. Can I'm going to take one more question from the floor, and then I'd like to get some closing thoughts from all of you, if you will. It's 10 past the hour now. We were told we could go on until 15:15. Yes, sir. Sorry. Yes, sir. Here in the front. Sorry.
I'm Avram Sutendorp, a rabbi from Holland, and I just feel an historical moment. Commemoration of liberation of the Second World War. Shoah is being commemorated in New York. But I think the most appropriate place is here, in this place, which is filled with compassionate energy. And I would like to say to you, FitzGerald, yes, with what Bono and all of you have done, the energy is here. And we make the commitment that in 2015, all children who have no education will have education. That is our commemoration of what happened. That is our promise for the future. We cannot fail.
Thank you, sir. Please make your point, sir. Yep.
I just want to, I thank you, and I thank all of you on the panel, but I want to say one point on trade. We will get the US, European Union, we will get India and Brazil. We will move forward. But we need to do what needs to be done. It's one good thing to try and teach a man how to fish, but he must have a pond and the fingerlings in the pond to be able to start learning and perfecting how to fish. If the farmers in Africa don't have the wherewithal to be able to produce, it won't matter too much what agreement we get in the WTO. So when Gordon talks of empowerment, empowerment in the area of empowering the African man and African woman to be able to produce, empowerment in the area of infrastructure, and that is very important, and physical infrastructure, and the other one that you just mentioned, empowerment in the area of human infrastructure. You will need these three areas of empowerment. And it's then that WTO agreement will mean a lot to us in Africa. Thank you very much.
Thanks for that. Okay, can we have a closing thought from everybody? I think it's important. We're at 10 past the hour, so please do keep them short. But Niall FitzGerald, if you will.
I'd like to actually address this to people who are probably not in this room, because the issue with a discussion like this is actually we're all on the same side. The panel is all on the same side, and I would guess that 95% of the people who came to this are on the same side. We're just struggling to find out how we turn thoughts, commitments into action. But I want to address the people outside this room because they really matter. The skeptics, the cynics, the people who believe that Africa is just filled with corrupt politicians, incompetent bureaucrats, unskilled workers. And for that reason, that it's a lost cause and they will never invest there. And I want to give them the three selfish, entirely self-centered reasons why they need to wake up now and invest today. Reason one, Africa is, not the Middle East, but Africa is the epicenter of a very dangerous clash of religious beliefs. Africa is the epicenter of that. And we need to be a force for healing, not a force for horror. We need to engage, and you do that through investment. Otherwise, the ensuing chaos will engulf us in our prosperous ghettos. The second point is about migration, or when you look at it from a European point of view, immigration, but it starts with migration. Somebody moves from where they are because there are no opportunities. Migration unbalances societies, it undermines security, and the only effective way to deal with migration is to deal with it at source, is to provide the opportunities, the hope, the bread, the jobs, not the guns, not the hunger. Deal with migration where it starts so that people won't feel the need to migrate. And the third, which has already been referred to, is on oil. Africa is going to be the most important source of new oil. We have a vested interest. You, the cynics, for your own selfish, self-interested reason, have a vested interest in ensuring that that region is secure and is stable and is prosperous. And if you don't become part of the attack on poverty, poverty of resource, poverty of hope, poverty of opportunity, then it will destroy you in your prosperous ghettos. That's the selfish reason why you must engage today.
Thank you, Niall. Paul Wolfowitz.
I want to say something similar. I'm not sure I can say it as eloquently, but I'm going to first of all say I second that strongly. And at the risk of offending the audience, it is, I mean, I think people are here because they believe in the issue and have some passion about it. But I think it's important not just to have the passion a couple of days when we come to Davos. For the World Bank, Africa has to be our first priority. So I guess I'm special pleading here. But I know for people who are operating in the global economy, even though there are great possibilities in Africa, as Niall says, it's not the thing that consumes you from day to day. It's not where the big opportunities are. Much more talk will be about China or about other major emerging economies. But it is very important to pay attention to Africa. And I would say it's not all of the self-interested reasons that you just heard, I think, are absolutely correct. But I think there's something else that's important, and that is, in a sense, how the whole world, and I'd say particularly the young people of the developed world, view this global economic system. Probably most of the people in this room, if you're here at Davos, I don't know, not most, some great majority would say that we've all benefited from a relatively open global economy. If you like the term globalization, then that's what we're talking about. I'm not sure I would stick to any specific term. But I think it's easy to take for granted the underlying political support for that whole system. And I think it is under challenge. And I think the huge numbers of people that turned out for the Live Aid concerts, people suffering from globalization themselves, but saw 600 million people in Africa who were suffering and said there's something wrong with this picture. There's something wrong with this system. And I think if in 5 or 10 years we can't have done something significant to fix it, there'll be an enormous amount of disillusionment about how this world system works. But when I say we, that's the last thing I'd like to say. We've talked a lot, I think, here about correctly what the developed world owes to Africa. But Africa's success is going to depend most of all on what Africans themselves do. And the reason I feel it's a 7, the reason I feel optimism is justified, is because of leaders like President Obasanjo and Ngozi, and quite a few other countries, not all of them, Rebecca, I admit there are some pretty awful ones around, but there's some who are really doing the right thing, and they deserve our support, not just in a material way, but moral and spiritual way as well.
Good stuff. Thank you for that. Keep it as brief as you can.
Someone said that they thought there was compassion fatigue at the moment. I actually think there is a huge mountain of goodwill. But I think coming out of 2005, we need direction, we need purpose, we need to be fixed on how we can meet the Millennium Development Objectives. And I do believe that the modern Marshall Plan we've talked about in relation to Africa is not about aid so much as empowerment. And I do mean empowerment, President, empowerment for people to be able to start businesses, for us to be able to develop the infrastructures necessary, empowerment in education, which is the most empowering experience of all, empowerment in healthcare. And that is the agenda that, working with the African Union and working with African countries, we should be pursuing. And that's why I suggest that the next stage is inviting countries to submit their long-term development plans for education and healthcare. Just one final point. We have learned over the last year that the world, despite all the goodwill, is very slow at, in practical terms, responding to emergencies. We had a huge amount of fundraising and a huge amount of money flowing to Asia, and in some cases, where there is disasters, to Africa. But the emergency services that we've been able to mobilize are simply not good enough. There are still people in Pakistan who do not have tents, one of the most easy pieces of equipment to provide. In Africa, there are famines at the moment that we're doing little about. So we must reform the way the world together, IMF, World Bank, United Nations, deals with emergencies. We must be able to act quickly where there are disasters, and I believe we should not come here next year and not have taken action over the course of this year to improve the way we deal with emergencies and disasters.
Thank you, Gordon. President Obasanjo.
I just want to say 2-3 things. In Africa, we are reforming, and things are changing. Maybe slowly, but they are changing. We, as Africans and African leaders, we are taking responsibility for our situation, and we are working to change our situation. All we require, as Gordon has said, is we appeal that the promises and the pledges should be, there should be delivery on them in such a way that we can be empowered in the areas of human infrastructure and capital infrastructure. And then Europe, America, and the rest of the world, and ourselves, will be the better for it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And Bono.
Thanks, Rebecca. Just 2 quick things that could come out of these discussions and ought to. To answer your question, Rebecca, your first question, the truth of it is it shouldn't really depend on our opinions on how well we did and our own measurement. We need some kind of mechanism to measure success and failure, both in the North and the South. Are the governments coming through with their promises, and is the money being spent well on the ground? Because actually, taxpayers aren't going to pay their taxes toward these ends unless they have confidence both in the North and the South perspective. So I think there needs to be some kind of a report or digest of reports that should come out perhaps before the G8 summits every year, and is a moment, is a day. I've spoken with Nkosi, excuse me, about this and others. I think that would be a great thing. So we have an actual objective mechanism. The second thing is practical. It's about the movement. because tin cupping stops when the movement grows. In the United Kingdom, it's an extraordinary thing, and I say this grudgingly as an Irishman, but polling 5th and 6th as what was uppermost on the mind of the British electorate in the last elections was poverty and global poverty and health issues. This is an incredible thing. It's an amazing thing, and it is to do with a few things. It's to do with the movement. It's to do with NGOs like Oxfam and others that have been working on these issues. It's to do with musicians like Peter Gabriel here in the room who've been talking about this for a long time. It's to do with Comic Relief, Red Nose Day, Live Aid, Bob Geldof. And also, I have to say, it's also to do with leadership. And you have here, and again, I find it hard to get this out of my mouth. I'm about to compliment a politician. But there is no finance minister, or ever has been a finance minister, who understands these issues as well as Gordon Brown, or has wanted to and is as passionate. I want to say that. Now, where's the $2 billion for Nigeria? Okay. Now, the practical thing that I want to get to is the movement was grown by the BBC also. Media space. They gave a lot. The national television station of Great Britain is an inspiration. And we need media space in other countries to grow the movement. And we can provide programming. Another two people here who are not just brightening the occasion here, but actually just are bright people working on these issues, Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie. Brad especially has been making, you can clap when I tell you why, not just because they're here, though that's good too. Brad has been making programming for media and making TV programs that are, you know, on it. And we've been getting them placed free of charge on networks in the United States. And we made this one film. We were looking for 1 million people this year to sign up to our campaign, this actual activism, you know, real activism. And there's 2 million people have signed up. By the next election in the United States, we will have 5 million people in the United States. That's bigger than the National Rifle Association, which I think deserves some applause. But it's because of, you know, this kind of programming and free media space. Now, if there's any media players here who would like to give us some media space, we can provide programming that will be really smart and sharp, and that could be a practical thing that would come out of here. And do I have anything else to say? Oddly enough, no. No.
Which means we shall wind this up. It's 20 past the hour. We thank you all very much indeed, but we thank our panelists very, very much indeed. Thanks, guys. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. 2 things.